What's going on, everybody? This is the Blockchain Backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to be taking a look over here at the Bitcoin price chart, seeing if we can determine if this could be some type of bottom. In yesterday's video, we were diving through the oddities that we had been noticing over the last 8 months with Bitcoin in regards to the structures it had made up here on the top, and how we were using deep bear market fractals in here, and why was this happening from such a high spot that we were following bear market fractals from the all-time high. If you missed that video, I would suggest to go watch it. It's 35 minutes long. There's a ton of work to put into that one. But in the end, the structures that we've been making up in here are highly similar to what happens in Bitcoin conclusions of bear markets. So I figured in today's video, we'll go through the exercise of saying, hey, is this what an actual bottom could look like? Or if this is working on a bottom, what do bottoms typically look like? Over the last several weeks, we've pointed to what bottoms have looked like for Bitcoin in the past, and that many times the first initial bounce is the one that's kind of the trick. You get a big capitulative moment, and finally you get a pretty good relief in there. Everybody thinks it's the actual bottom, and then it goes on and sets one new low. In the C19 sell-off, that was not the case in here, actually. It flew all the way down, and it was so capitulative. It was such an intense moment of fear that it actually was the real bottom on the first initial sell-off. We did have a moment like that happen here in the cryptocurrency market during that sell-off with Bitcoin, with the whole Terra Luna and UST fiasco. So we did have somewhat of a catalyst happen in there as well. So could that have caused us to already get as far as we needed to go? Don't know, but I'll show you what bottoms have typically looked like. Usually having some type of fake out rally before the real bottom gets put in. I've shown this even in the bigger corrections that happened in Bitcoin back in 2017, that many times we have the big capitulative moment. There's the little fake out rally that happens at the bottom before the real bottom gets set. That also happened back here in this correction as well. Fake out rally, real bottom gets set. And that is typically the norm in corrections. It is more common in these corrections to see a fake out rally after capitulation that sets the new low than it is to actually have a moment like we did back in C19 where there isn't one. But even when the real bottom of Bitcoin came back in 2018, we did have that big falling and then one more. As everybody in crypto probably knows at this point, of course, when these two things did happen, they did happen down to the 200-week moving average in here. As we know right now, we are not at the 200-week moving average. A little swoop of the lows would make some logical sense, but let's take a closer look at it. A simple comparison to the 2018 capitulation moment would show how did it work? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rolling back up to wave 4 within wave 5, and then heading on to new lows. As we notice, we did cross above, and we're looking at this on the 4-hour time frame. We were able to cross here above the 50 moving average on here. We're also looking at Bitcoin up here in current times on the 4-hour time frame. Once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rolling back up to wave 4 within wave 5, crossing above the 50 moving average here on the 4-hour time frame, unable to get through. Now we're back below. Structurally, comparing to the 2018 sell-off and the 2018 capitulation, logic would show if it did something similar to that, it would still be a move down and a move down, kind of working like this before we could get our way back up. What would happen with the moving averages in that circumstance? As we can see, that does go down and that does touch the 200-week moving average. So just structurally, with how it's looking at this current time, that would make logical sense to continue following what we saw back in 2018 for the capitulative moment. That kind of the worst of it is behind us, but still it's not ready to give us all of the gloriness of a big bounce. And that's what we've talked about, how the first bounce can be kind of the trickster. And what we see is there's not a whole lot of follow through in the altcoin market yet. So kind of scores a point in the corner over here for we're close, but not quite there. And that does satisfy the 200-week moving average getting touched like we saw back in 2018. That would make sense for our current times right now too. So that does kind of score a check mark of logical thinking for something like that to happen. Next, if we look over here at the altcoin market, we've been studying this corrective structure, how we've seen this happen in multiple assets for Bitcoin and for Ethereum as their first major corrections after they broke out into the new all-time high. Even in here, after big major capitulation came in here, there was the faker bounce that did lead to one excessive push before the big recovery came in. As we know, there's been no kind of fake rally right here unless this has been it. So again, like the end of the 2018 capitulation, there was kind of like the shorts all closing themselves out as it got down in here, but still there was one more swoop, just like in 2018. Moving on over to the next correction that happened as well, we can see capitulation came in. There was its first bounce that came in here that seemed like it was the bottom, but once again, it goes in for one more swoop of the lows again. That happened in back-to-back corrections in here. And that, you get complete panic and worry. And then, you get your first bounce and you think, okay, that's it. That's the bottom. We're good to go. But still, it's got one more swoosh. Same thing happens back in here. And the same thing happens at the bottom of the 2018 bear market for Bitcoin. So it's super, super common that after big capitulative moves end up happening in here, that the first bounce is not the bounce. So that's very common to see that happen when bottoms are coming in. If we look back to 2015 or the end of the 2014 bear market, which concluded in 2015, it did not have that type of circumstance. It actually was capitulative into the actual bottom, and that marked it. There was no secondary bounce or secondary revisit in new lows that were set. It just capitulated, and then that was it. And as we know for the C19 sell-off, that's exactly what happened down in here as well. Just massive capitulation. No real big bounce came right away. It still kept hovering down here at these lows and then finally went off into it as well. So it's quite mixed in here, right? You have circumstances in which it does revisit the lows, circumstances which it doesn't. But the conclusions of 2018, the conclusions of 2014 and 15 all touch that 200-week moving average. So it all depends. Is that thing super important or not? Or did the catalyst event that we had happen in this market as that capitulation was occurring, as we did back in March of 2020, give it enough steam for enough panic to have already occurred? It's real iffy. And we've actually gotten some negative price action here just while I've been recording this right now. But if we look at how that ended up playing out, when the capitulation happens, right, it just happens quick and then it's over, right? Then it can just waddle on in here. And we know that our capitulation happened at that speed. And I'll compress this thing down, squeeze it a little bit more to try to adjust it for time in here to see that, once the capitulations occurred, there was no waddling that eventually led to a new low. But again, the difference here is when this happened, 200-week moving average was hit. Is there some golden rule written into Bitcoin that it must hit the 200-week moving average? That's the big question. So I know everybody out there is wanting it to be like, is the bottom in? Because what does everybody want to do? Everybody wants to sell the literal top. Everybody wants to buy the literal bottom. But as you can see in here, there's multiple ways that bottoms can form if the bottom is going to form here. That in both conclusions to the massive sell-offs for Bitcoin that we've seen in the last decade, they both concluded in different ways. One of them with a straight line capitulation down that ended it. That's also how the last one happened in March of 2020, but also the conclusion of the 2018 bear market also worked its way down to have its 200-week moving average hit. And that's typically how these endings come in here after these corrections, in which we've seen very similarities to this whole correction in here to what we've seen in Bitcoin and what we've seen in the altcoin market happening. That even here, you get your big capitulation, but the first bounce, like we talked about for the last 2 weeks, is kind of the fake bounce. So it's not super clear cut on how it could work if a bottom does form in here. But one of the optimistic things for a bottom to form, of course, is seeing this DXY getting rejected pretty hard at this point. But even if the DXY is getting rejected in here, we can clearly see it does not usually happen in a straight line, which is what we've been getting in here, right? And maybe the market knows that there's going to be a roll up before it eventually turns itself over. And I would suspect that would be common because that's what usually happens. But sometimes it doesn't. So, figure that out. That's going to be everybody's, the big question. It's the big question in here, right? Sometimes it doesn't. And it could just hang out in here before working its way back up. So I'm sure everybody's like, wait a minute, we got nowhere in this whole video. It didn't give any conclusion to which one it could be or what, is the more likely thing to happen in here. But that's the reality of it. At least that's the reality I have to accept. I would say the only thing that is consistent between the two is that one, you're going to, if you go with this whole idea of saying, The euphoria phase of the Bitcoin bull run occurred back in here, and Coinbase IPO'd on that moment. And if you're in the belief that, things did change in here, and it was odd to have bear market structures occurring from the peak, that why was this structure happening right here rather than us, crashing and then having it way down lower. And then why is this structure showing up here as well at the same phase? And both of these moments in time are the same phase for these Bitcoin bear markets in here. Why were these showing up super high? If you're going to go with the idea that this is capitulation and this is the ending, well, then the concept of both of these is the only thing consistent between the two endings in here was the 200-week moving average. Otherwise, one of them had a capitulative move. That was the end of it. This one had the capitulative move with the fake bounce, which we see historically happen frequently. And then it went on to go down and touch, just barely tap the 200-week moving average, and then worked its way back up. So that's the big question for everybody in here, right? And that if this thing, even though it's already completed capitulative price action, still it didn't dip as far as it did, and it didn't hit the 200 weeks. So if you base it on the 200-week moving average, if you base it off of capitulation of 2018, both of those tell you that they have to go down and hit the 200-week moving average, which is a little bit lower. And if you base it off the distance of the equal length moves in here, it tells you it goes down to the 200-week moving average. But the reality was it was so capitulative at that time, with a catalyst that occurred at the exact same time, that the straight line down price action that we ended up seeing in here doesn't indicate a revisit of the lows. So the big guessing game. And I can tell you, I've spent way more time in these charts contemplating this. I mean, you wouldn't believe, waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, studying at this, contemplating this, and this being something battling in my mind of how do you figure out which one seems more likely? And those are all the challenges that you have, is that in those circumstances, it hit the 200-week moving average. In lots of circumstances, like we showed, the first bounce is the fake bounce, and it goes down a little bit lower. That would also satisfy the 200-week moving average. But the thing about it is that when this thing started capitulating, and it happened so quickly in here, that was the end of it. And there was no revisit. And that when we were done. And the fact that we had such a catalyst event occur that caused pure panic at the same time. And that's also what happened with C19. It was such a catalyst event that happened at the exact same time. And the euro reversed right where we needed it to reverse on that exact same day. And so did the DXY, or the US dollar currency index. Then you question, well, yeah, the 200-week didn't get hit. Yeah, we haven't had that secondary dip down. But did that catalyst, did that extreme sell-off price action satisfy enough for that to be it and that we're done? Very difficult, but it's very common to have that secondary visit down there on the lows and set that new low, like we've shown through all of these corrections in here. And that even in the structure we've been following with the altcoin market, if it's completing its correction in here, even in here, it does have that. It has that final kind of can't take it anymore, right? And to show how the market just won't even give the answer, I had to step away to get some lunch really quick. And I come back and here we go. It popped right back up and now the whole market is green. So it still just doesn't want to give the answer on that. So it's just been this 12-day waiting game in here as the DXY still continues to get pummeled. And again, for those who wonder why the DXY even matters, it's just because of how the market has behaved before and the timing of these things. This is the big 2017 fall of the DXY. This is the 2020 and 2021 fall of the DXY. And in both those circumstances, we had positive price action for the cryptocurrency market. And so with that strong reversal over there on the DXY and the capitulative move that happened here in Bitcoin and in the cryptocurrency market, it still just begs the question, does the 200-week moving average need to be hit? Was the capitulation that we had in there strong enough to conclude the capitulation? Or does there have to be one more rollover for the 200-week moving average? And I can tell you from this being ongoing now for 12 days that we've been in here and me contemplating this particular thing. This is the one thing I've been mostly spending my time on to try to contemplate on which one can I have conviction on is the bottom actually in or is it not? 12 days, 12 plus hours per day for those 12 days. And the same thing I keep getting drawn back to is everything I've shown in this video. then I can't come up with a conclusive conviction. And whether or not I'm right or I'm wrong in either way, even for me personally to sit here and be like, yes, I think this is the most likely. All those factors in there, all of those things make it too hard to even attempt to guess. And if either of them happen, it would be completely not surprising to me, because when we had the C19 sell-off and pure panic, it didn't revisit the lows and set a new low again. When we had the sell-off at the end of the 2014 and 2015 bear market, it did not revisit the lows. But the corrections all the way up in the 2017 bull market of Bitcoin had them multiple times, and even the bottom of the 2018 bear market had it as well before it was able to go. So the only thing I can do is sit back and wait, because we're now on 12 days in this $2,000 price range where it just won't give us an answer. And I've done all kinds of things in here to try to say that, hey man, this is how I'm going to figure it out, right? I'm like, okay, we're going to put the Fibonacci's on here. We'll see, can we find any reactionary levels? And it's like, okay, look, we can see that the real breakdown, and when we had the December 4th liquidation thing that happened, where just things hit the fan back on December 4th, that was the moment where we got through that 702 Fibonacci retracement level. That's the area we've never gone back to visit. From a Fibonacci standpoint, all this makes sense. Look, we can even see this big breakdown that happened right down in here. That happened from the 0.236 extension. We could see, oh, look, it had reactions right here on this one. That one looks good. We can see that these got really close to those fib levels right in there, and that, hey, look, there's so many reactions on here from a fib standpoint. It looks good. Like, this is actually it. Where we headed, we're heading back to the Fibonacci retracements. We're heading back to where things really started hitting the fan back there on December 3rd and December 4th. Right? Like, all that logically makes sense too. But the dang problem here is that 200-week moving average still sitting down there lower. We know that it typically goes down there to touch that, and that many times the first bounce is the fake bounce, and then we get the real bottom. And for those who are here for the XRP, SEC, Ripple insanity that happened in there too, what did we have? Massive capitulation happening in there. The first bounce is not the real bounce, but the new low comes in, and that's it. But it wasn't the case here, and it wasn't the case here. So 12 days of work, 12 hours a day, contemplating this and having restless nights thinking about this. And that's where I stand. All that work, so much work. That's where I stand. And if I had to just guess, right? If I had to lean one way or the other, even though I'm dead in the middle, if I had to guess, because it's so common that you see it go down and touch one more time, the thing that would make the most sense to me would just be kind of like a fake up and then down and then off it can go. Because of the examples we looked at, 60, 70% of the time, that's what it does. And that the 200-week moving average is down there too. And that we haven't seen follow through come through on the altcoin market yet. And that it's loved that 200-week so much. That would be my best guess. So that's what's on my mind. That's what I've been looking at the most out of anything out there right now in this market, is trying to figure out what could happen if this thing is right? If the top was, on chain and activity-wise and sentiment-wise and euphoria-wise was back there in April, creating the bear market structures there at the all-time high. If we're in the capitulative phase, and if this is the bottom of a capitulative phase, what do those bottoms look like? That is what has been on my mind the most, and just cannot figure it out. But, I think a lot of progress was made. Don't get me wrong, figuring out that, hey, why are we having these bear market structures that are happening at the highs? It's really looking like some type of running flat bear market, and that we're reaching the very end of it. And like we showed with Litecoin, how, there was the exact same amount of time that took place there for Litecoin from peak to trough as it was back there in 2018. I think a lot of things are starting to add up and make a whole lot more sense. But as for saying that's it, it's done, I wanted to show you all the things over on all the different charts that make me be there's different things that could happen here. So just kind of giving you some insight into my mind. But all right, guys, that's it. That's going to wrap it up for this one. I said I wouldn't make a video today. I was feeling under the weather. I feel 100% today. It was weird. Back to normal. So late afternoon release. I had a lot going on today that impacted my recording, but I'm done. So we'll get it out either way. But I hope that you guys are having a good day out there. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you could be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick me up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.